I'm Dr. Duke with The New American, and I'm really pleased to be joined today by two South Carolina state reps, because South Carolina is one of those states, I'm proud to say, that is really being very proactive about your Second Amendment rights. And we've got some really good men in very good positions down there, and I want to introduce you to two of them. I would like to introduce you first to Josiah Magnuson, who is the district rep's 38th district in South Carolina, and Stewart Jones, who's the 14th district in South Carolina. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Duke. It's great to be here.
You guys are doing great work. Josiah, why don't you start and give us an update? I know we talked to Stewart a while ago. Go ahead and update us. What's the latest legislation that you're working on in the State House there to try to protect Second Amendment rights?
So Stewart Jones and I have introduced a bill called the Second Amendment Preservation Act. And what it would do, it would make all of South Carolina a sanctuary state. We're using the principle of anti-commandeering, that we're not going to enforce any unconstitutional federal actions. So we're not going to allow state money to be used for gun control. We're not going to allow state personnel from state agencies to be used for gun control. We're going to just say the buck stops here. We're not going to allow anything that violates the Second Amendment in South Carolina in the future as of January 2020.
Josiah, before we move on to Stewart real quick, what do you think the odds are? What we don't know, for people who aren't watching or aren't up to date on South Carolina politics, if you get this through the House, what are the odds of it passing in the Senate there, and what's the odds that the governor will sign it?
So I think we got a lot of momentum right now. We've been able to push back against red flag laws. We certainly have a lot of attention right now on this issue, and a lot of people understand the need for it. So the hurdle is going to be getting it through the Senate. We've got some gun rights advocates over there, but we certainly need more. And but I think if we're able to get it through the House and the Senate, I'm sure that Governor McMaster would sign.
Stewart, you and I have talked before about this, and I remember when we talked a while ago, this whole process was beginning. Can you, for the people who saw that first interview, can you talk about what's different now, or where the process has evolved since the last time you and I talked about this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be back on your show, and some really positive things that happened with our letter that we had talked about. We sent this letter back in September to the president, to our federal delegation, and explained to them the dangers of red flag laws and how limiting law-abiding people, free people, limiting their natural right to defend themselves is not a solution. And so what this has led to, the good thing is that they backed off of the red flag laws from pushing a federal red flag law, so to say. But the bad thing is that there's, of course, talk about pushing the funding to the states in order to for the states to have their own red flag laws. Not only this, but also we're seeing a trend around the country, of course, where local government, we're having a lot of radical liberal local governments are trying to enact their own kind of gun confiscation methods and red flag laws. And so that has prompted us back in November, we pre-filed this bill, the Second Amendment Preservation Act, which is H 4704. And what it does, exactly as Representative Magnuson was saying, this bill actually intervenes. It says that our state is not going to take funding from the federal government to enforce red flag laws or any kind of gun confiscation, and nor are we going to devote our resources, so personnel, public resources. It also applies to the subdivisions of the state, so your local governments, your municipalities, counties, cities, this applies to them as well. So it gives us essentially another weapon, to fight gun control in South Carolina.
And I urge any of our listeners out there to go back to thenewamerican.com, the New American website, and you can see that earlier interview I did with Stewart that laid out in more detail that particular program. Let me ask you, Josiah. obviously the big hub, the big place in the country where the hot button issue about gun control is right now is Virginia. Virginia's a largely rural state, mostly conservative, but you've got Alexandria, you've got those suburbs near Dallas, near Washington, D.C., and you've got all those Washington liberals who've moved into Virginia, who've turned it really almost a blue state. You've got one of the most anti-gun governors in Governor Northam there, and so that's where everybody's attention is paid. I'm very heartened by the fact that these counties all across Virginia have declared themselves Second Amendment sanctuaries. Have you taken any lessons from them? You're being proactive in South Carolina, what I love. You're doing this before anyone forces you to. Virginia's got to respond. What have you learned from Virginia, or are you mirroring anything that they're trying to do there?
I think the biggest lesson that we can learn from Virginia, Duke, is that we have to stay involved and, as you mentioned, be proactive. Virginians, by and large, didn't get out and vote. They didn't, get to their legislature and support this type of legislation. So they're having to deal with it on the back end. What we need to do in South Carolina is citizens who support the Second Amendment need to stand up and vote for committed conservatives that will hold the Second Amendment as sacred and will defend the Constitution. We'll make that the priority, and then we need citizens to get involved behind this legislation, and we need to really just raise the standard now instead of waiting for to have to come back and defend later.
Josiah, are you seeing boots on the ground? Are you seeing local Tea Party groups, local gun rights groups? Have they rallied around you? Are you getting the kind of support from Second Amendment advocates that you need, or do you need more of them to come out still?
I think we definitely need more. I think that we've got some sort of Tea Party groups, liberty activists that are out there explaining this to people, but we need more. I think we need to get on talk radio. I think we need to get put the message out there, do some press conferences and things. So there's a lot of work ahead of us, but yes, the message is getting out, and I'm excited about the future as we go into this next legislative session.
Stewart, South Carolina, like Virginia, is very much a rural state, isn't it? And a state that has more traditional values, except outside the university town and the big cities. Is that a fair way to define what the demographics of South Carolina look like now?
It is. The one thing I would add to that is that there is, unfortunately, there's a lot of government officials, as we've talked about before, they don't get into government. They don't go into public office for the right reasons, to defend our Constitution, to defend our Bill of Rights, those natural rights, which our founders fought for and given to us from God, And so that's one thing. There's a lot of people being naive, I think, in government, and they'll say, well, we support the Second Amendment. We support the Bill of Rights, but we're not willing to take a stand on it. That's what a lot of them do. And I think, if anything, history has shown us, and what's going on in our country right now, we've got to take a stand. So I'm urging people to come to our delegation meeting, the Lawrence County delegation meeting tomorrow at 6 p.m. at the old Lawrence County Courthouse to speak, and we've gotten a lot of good response. There's a lot of people planning to come and speak and say that South Carolina needs to be a gun Second Amendment sanctuary and needs to defend the Bill of Rights.
And if you were going to counsel, Stewart, people who wanted to support you, not just in South Carolina, but outside of South Carolina as well, who would you have them write? Who would you have them send an email or a letter or a phone call to? What would be the best way, you think, to try to rile this up and get more voices speaking out for what you're doing in South Carolina?
Yeah. In South Carolina, I would go speak at city council meetings, county council meetings. I would approach your elected officials and ask them to get on board with this. And that's one really good thing we're seeing is that people, from what's going on in Virginia, unfortunately, in their state legislature, the good thing is that people are getting really active. So I think we can be proactive about it and pass 4704. Constitutional carry is also, I really hope 2020 is the year for constitutional carry in South Carolina. And that's one more thing we can do to defend our Bill of Rights and allow people to take part in their natural right to defend themselves.
Josiah, we have about a time for one last final sentence from you. Give it to us.
Stand up for the Constitution and stand up for the Second Amendment and join us in the fight.
Josiah Magnuson, Stewart Jones, two really, really up-and-coming, important representatives from the state of South Carolina, the front lines of this. If you want your Second Amendment rights, help these guys out. Thanks, gentlemen.